Good afternoon, all. Thank you for joining me here in my conversation in buying coffee at scale. Uh, the title at scale might be a little bit more of a scary, but it's not. It can be also be used for any type of buying, small buying, medium buying, and large buying. I think that makes scale the main positive thing is that it helps at least logistically move things faster. But however, it also makes problems bigger when we have problems go south. So essentially, we do things differently when we're buying more coffee at scale. In this exciting, uncertain market, we definitely view things with a more of a risk management approach. So definitely, there's a lot of business planning and process planning that go behind it that I'm going to explain here in detail. So, I'm part of National DCP. National DCP is the buying organization for Dunkin' Donuts in the United States, or now called Dunkin'. So, part of my job is to make sure that our objective is to manage price risk and supply risk. So, with that, we have an objective, right? To ensure a stable supply of coffee to our franchisee members that supports as well our upstream partners. So, partners in Colombia, partners in Brazil, anywhere we buy coffee. Our job is to provide liquidity to partners upstream, but to also ensure that our members, the restaurant owners of Dunkin' restaurants in the US, have a stable pricing and stable supply. So I divided my objective in three areas. So the first area is supply continuity and assurance. So as a large-scale buyer, and this could be used also as a small-scale buyer, we provide liquidity. We are always in the market looking for coffee. So we are constantly a buyer of Colombian coffee, Brazilian coffee, Central American coffee. That provides liquidity to the market, right? And that provides, at the end, sellers with always an option to sell. And sometimes we provide more of a visibility in case we have to buy more for a longer-term period. We're always in the market to buy 6 months ahead or 1 year ahead in some cases. That provides sellers with more of a guaranteed liquidity as well. So they can see more of their business costs as well when they sell coffee to a large chain, because we are also in the business of having stable business costs over the course of the long term. Two, it's price stability and cost planning. So this is similar to the first one, but I'm looking at this with the eyes of a buyer. My members, which are entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs in the US, need stable price stability and supply to run their business every day. They need to have a forecast of 12 months ahead or longer of what is that cost of coffee that they will sell to customers will going to cost. So we provide them with that visibility and reliability as well. So we are actively in the futures market and in the differentials market taking trades to make sure that we are providing that visibility to our members. We have many indicators that we make sure we follow just to make sure that we are actively buying at a favorable levels. That does not mean that we're actually buying from the producers at those levels. It means that we're using the futures market as a tool to provide liquidity as a buyer. Three is to maintain these relationships, right? At the end, coffee is a long-term business. We want to make sure our partners are progressing, right? We are net buyers of coffee, and we are essentially always net short coffee. So we need to make sure that our buyers, who are essentially in the equal position of us, that it's opposite, are always progressing, right? So we are always going back and visiting them and see ways that we can continuously improve our supply chain. What barriers exist today that we can improve? This is a long-term game that we're in the business for. So the idea of this is that we want to make sure that our sellers are constantly improving, because we have a vision to grow. Dunkin' is not declining. Dunkin' is a growing business with more sellers, with more entrepreneurs, opening more restaurants. So the idea is that a growing demand will need more suppliers over the course of the long term. So to do this, right, to essentially meet the objectives that I laid out in the previous slide, we have a process flow. It's very simple. It can be applied to any essentially small, medium-sized roaster. But the first step is knowing your customer, right? Know what they want. Know what type of coffee they drink. What blends are they requiring? So that way we know essentially what we need to buy, right? If we know our customer really well and we can plan for that, then we can go into the origins essentially and develop a supply plan, right? So knowing the customer helps us develop a demand forecast. At the end, this is a constantly moving business, but the idea is to always have a forecast, right? A forecast that points to the future and points to potential new beverages that we will be selling. And that will help us with step 3, which is develop a supply plan. At the end, when we have a good idea or that what we're going to sell in our restaurants, we develop a supply plan of all the origins that we need to buy, all the derivatives that we have to have in place, and so essentially we are prepared and can ensure that we're meeting our customers' objectives. Now, coffee is a risky business. This conversation is about risk. It's not about business planning. So in our supply plan, we make sure that we identify the risks, right? There's weather risk, there's price risk. Essentially, we're in the business of coffee. We know that. So the idea is that we have several tools that we can transfer risk, accept risk, avoid risk. But the idea is that we know those risks right today, and knowing those risks helps us also improve our supply chains. Because if our supply chains are a risk, the idea is to help them improve their situation, not to make it worse, but over the course of the long term, strengthen the supply chain. Supply chains are only as strong as the weakest link, so the idea is always to make sure that the supply chains are progressing, not reversing. And last step is deliver the coffee that the customer needs. So at the end, as I said, my main customer is the Dunkin members in the United States. So we need to make sure that we have reliable pricing to the expectation that we provided, coffee always on time. So the idea is that they never are short coffee. They always know that they will have that coffee in 6 months, 12 months, the next day. They're going to have the coffee that they will need to sell in the future. And then we would just reverse that cycle. The idea is that this is a repeatable cycle. At the end, when we're managing things at scale, it has to be repeatable. It has to be repeatable with less, I would say, with not too many roadblocks. I think that's kind of like the main, sometimes, difference when you're buying small coffees and when you're buying large quantities of coffees, is that the coffees that you're sourcing have to be repeatable. That could be many things. That could be same suppliers. That could be qualities of coffee that are predetermined. But it has to be something that it can be repeated tomorrow, in 1 month, in 1 year, so we can develop a process around it. At the end, this is some essential business planning, but I would say that is the main difference between buying coffee at a large-scale operation and buying small lot coffees that can change year to year. So at the end, we are part of a supply chain, right? I sit almost in the end of the supply chain, closer to the customer. But I have tools that I can use to avoid risk, transfer risk, reduce risk, and accept risk. At the end, this is a risky business from every angle. Coffee, I would say, is one of the more, farming coffee is like growing, it's like operating a warehouse without a roof. At the end, we know that the risks that our farmers have, suppliers have, we have the risk of weather from our side. Coffee moves up and down, consumption moves up and down based on weather. But we have tools. We have tools that we can use at our disposal to manage the risk, right? So I'm going to go over a few of those tools. The one and most, I would say, in the right side, and the upper right side, is avoid risk, right? It's easy to just, let's say, I'm not going to buy this coffee because There's unstable quality, there's unstable supply, but at the end, with high risk, there's also high returns, right? If we're able to mitigate that, or at least to manage that risk, right, then we can navigate through that. But I would say nobody wants to really be operating in the avoiding, because then you're also not strengthening your supply chain. The idea of this is extreme cases that you want to apply in case something is unpredictable. It's a major weather issue that's impacting a country or disrupting logistics in a country. It's not something that you want to be using constantly. Avoiding is definitely degrading the supply chain. It's not improving the supply chain. Then we go to the other quadrant, which is risk mitigation, right? So in this quadrant, the impact could be medium, the impact could be low, but the probability is still very high. This market moves up and down, especially the futures market, but we have ways to mitigate, right? The futures market provides tools that we can use to know price of coffee. Price of coffee can move within many factors. It's not only weather, supply, but at the end, there's ways to mitigate it. And this is mostly, as a net short buyer, we're always needing to buy coffee. So by reducing risk, we're reducing our exposure of coffee price going up. Or we might buy more coffee because we think there's going to be less supply of something, of any origin. So the idea of that is that we will front load our buying because we think there's going to be a shortage at a later date. But at the end, these are all data-driven decisions. This is not opinions made by me. At the end, we look at data objectively that makes us apply these tools. And there's many resources today that we use today, but at the end, you need to be using those resources to apply this data. Then, in the down quadrant, we have transfer risk. So, in our case, we buy coffee delivered at our roaster's plant. So, we don't want to deal with the freight risk. It's a high impact, but it's a low probability in most cases. But the idea of this is that we're buying at a delivered location, right? So we make sure our sellers are fulfilling the contracts all the way to our roasters. At the end, it's a high impact if we don't have the coffee, because as a roaster, we need to have the coffee at a certain time, right? So it's a low probability, but it's a high impact. So it's something that we use. We transfer that to somebody else to essentially, because we want to make sure that the experts are managing it. At the end, we're not jack of all trades here. Our main objective is to make sure that we are meeting the objectives that I met before. We're not trying to be experts at any essentially main objective, but we need to empower our partners that are to meet these objectives. And last would be accept risk. In this case, in this business, we know when there's low risk. We know when weather's good. At those times, we just accept it. But accepting risk does not mean that you're ignoring risk. In those cases, it means that you just know the loss of something, right? In case things go bad, because things could go bad. But in that scenario, the idea is that you're always trying to make sure that using data, again, to make sure that the probability of something happening is low. So you're not assuming that decision just on your opinion. So that's my conversation on managing risk, and I'll open it up for questions if there's any.
Hi, my name is Sasha Renhifo, and I just had a question about the risk graph, because it seemed by the time at the very top, you had the producer all the way to the right. Yeah? So is this implying that the producer is carrying the least risk in the supply chain? And if so, it just seems to me, from my point of view, that perhaps the producer has the most risk, because by the time a coffee buyer like yourself accepts a sample, and I'm speaking not so much about price risk, but quality, right? Because if the coffee is bad, the buyer just rejects it based on, I don't like it. So I reject it, and someone else will ultimately buy it. And by putting the quality risk onto the producer, which they obviously have because it's their coffee, they grew it, it's their problem, by the time samples arrive to a buyer in America or Japan or wherever, they've gone through so many different stages of evaluation that you've basically reduced the quality risk to your minimum level of acceptance, and therefore you've placed, I'm not saying you specifically, just buyers in general have placed the risk of quality to the producers. And is that not the riskiest of all propositions, excluding the price risk that you also mentioned?
Thanks for your question. I believe I should have emphasized more on how this slide is depicted. But the idea of the top chain is that essentially we're always transferring risk to any of these partners. Not this slide, but the producer being at the far end of the slide doesn't mean they are the lowest risk partner in this case. It's just these are the parties or the partners that we use to transfer risk, right? If we are always let's say a net short of coffee, and we are fine accepting risk, but by that angle, we're transferring the risk of that coffee to the next person in the supply chain, right? So at the end of the day, don't look at this slide with the objective of putting it at a producer of low risk. The idea is that you're always transferring the risk either to the customer or back to the producer.
Hey, Gustavo, thank you for the presentation. I don't have a question so much as I'm just curious if you could maybe comment a little further on your views right now with the global coffee supply. We're currently in like a situation where we have a large deficit of coffee globally, and here in Colombia, it seems to be that we're facing a lot of supply issues with all the rain that's been had here. So just curious if you have any particular comments about how you're viewing, let's say Colombia in particular, the supply issues in Colombia.
Great question. So whenever we have a supply situation, right, at the end, price needs to do its job, right? Price needs to start, I would say, filtering buyers, right? At the end, there's going to be buyers of an origin that will start walking away eventually from an origin, right? Because the price is doing its job as supply gets down. Depending on the sensitivity of the buyer, of the net buyer, in this case, in my customer Dunkin, there might not be a change. We might always be net buyers of Colombia until the customer starts saying something, hey, our pockets, our money for coffee is not allowing us to be buying Colombia anymore, or to be buying this blend anymore that has a high percentage of Colombia. So until that starts to happen, until demand really starts to fall down because of the pass-through, right, of high prices, a sense we will always be a net buyer of coffee. At the end, the main supply situation that Colombia has is something that will eventually just filter buyers out of the equation. If buyers don't fall out because Colombia is just a great coffee, then it will be definitely a problem that major brands eventually will have to look with a different eyes. It's going to be more of a supply-related, can we get enough Colombian coffee in our hands? But until that, I feel it's just going to be a matter of transferring price to the customer. And by that, we're just transferring that price risk, right, to the customer, because our objective is to ensure that we are meeting the requirements of a restaurant. and they require Colombian coffee, then we will fulfill that objective until we see different.
Hello. Yeah, I can see that your risk management matrix is more from the corporate side and to supply your consumers, but I don't see it applying on the production side. So what is your company doing to actually help mitigate farmers or origin mitigate some of the risks that are pretty intrinsic to production of coffee?
So at the end, we let the experts try to do their job, right? At the end, we're not farmers, we're not experts in farming, we're not producers, but if there is areas of opportunity, right, that we can look at to empower our supply chains, we do that. So that's something that we usually work with our partners to identify what opportunities can we have to help farmers mitigate risk, right? If a country, if a farmer, if a supply chain is going through a period of bad weather, what can we do to mitigate that in the future? At the end, we're not the farming experts, but we make sure that we partner with the people that know that, how to manage that. So at the end, in my matrix, I'm not putting that I'm a farmer. At the end of the day, if I want to accept the risk, right, of buying Colombian coffee, I will make sure that eventually I will start partnering with the right people that are actually helping to drive Colombian coffee forward.
Have you done anything at Origin to help mitigate risk? Has your company done anything in reality?
Sorry?
Has your company in practice done or been proactive at helping mitigate risk at Origin?
So we're constantly evaluating projects, right, that are potential, right, the right fit for us, right? So we're constantly evaluating new genetics in coffee that will look to solve future problems. Some of the problems in coffee that are allowed today we might not be the best fit of a partner to solve them. We're looking more longer term thinking, right? Is it genetics? Is it a new renovation plan, right? That we have to be thinking about. Not really something just related to what's happening today. Okay, well, thank you for the questions, and I hope you continue having a wonderful PRF.